when soil is healthy, it sequesters carbon. So the healthier the soil, the better functioning the carbon cycle.
So if you manage that cattle in the right way, it's pooing and weeing and munching on the grass and keeping all that grass in a vegetative state. All the microbes and the soil health is always improved in that situation. It could arguably be the greatest asset that we all have to remedy the shit fight that we've found ourselves in.
Welcome to the second Renaissance, where we decode the rebirth of human creativity in a technology-driven world. In this second season, we explore how sustainability is elevating our human consciousness and catalyzing us to create within constraints. We decipher why now is the biggest entrepreneurial opportunity since the dawn of industrialization, and what leaders can do to harness the winds of change. I'm Anders Sorma-Nielsen, global futurist, impact champion, and father, and your host for the second Renaissance. In today's special Christmas episode, I sit down with regenerative farmers and food fighters Matilda Brown and Scott Gooding from The Good Farm. Till and Scott share their life journeys of reconnecting with a sustainable diet that includes regenerative meat and animal proteins, the sustainability case for regenerative agriculture or regen, why veganism and vegetarianism is not the climate answer, the importance of soil-based carbon sequestration, how sustainable comfort food can save the planet. We talk about some Christmas recipes and why tilling the soil is the new devil, no pun intended, Till. We discuss how carbon is not the world's enemy and why the agricultural system can move from being a massive carbon emitter to a carbon sequesterer, and how we can all enjoy a guilt-free regen ham or Swedish meatballs this Christmas. Welcome to the show, Scott and Till, and thanks for whetting my Christmas appetite in a sustainable fashion. Matilda, Scott, welcome to the little Think Studio.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. It's pretty impressive.
Thank you. We're getting prepared here for Christmas, and I couldn't really think of anyone better to invite than two people I keep bumping into, sort of surreptitiously or otherwise in Avalon Village and at the Warriewood farmers markets, etc. Obviously, everyone's thinking about Christmas and food these days. I recall a year ago I invited one of my friends who's got a really cool plant-based, lab-grown meat company called All G Food. So we talked about all things, not so natural necessarily, but you know, meat certainly wasn't in the traditional sense on the menu in that conversation.
Yeah. Did you try some?
Some of his plant-based meats. I have tried his burgers that are called Bud's Burgers. Not too bad.
Are they mushroom-based? I've been hearing some mushroom-based burger alternatives, and they're not too bad.
Yeah, I've had the Impossible Burger in the United States, which I thought was really, really interesting. And you know, it's even a plant-based burger that supposedly bleeds, just like medium rare.
Wow.
I don't know if you've had a chance to go that far.
I feel like that's...
No.
Is that necessary? Like, if you're going...
That it bleeds. It's very important for us omnivores.
I find it all fairly fascinating that there's this... Obviously, everyone's wants and desires and needs are important. So if someone goes vegan, that's their call, right? But then why do we need to package food in the plant-based foods the shape of a sausage or the shape of a pork cutlet? Why can't it be its own thing? Because if you're vegan and you're opposed to meat for whatever reason, why would you want something in a supermarket shelf that looks like what you're trying to avoid? So why would you want a plant-based burger that bleeds? Like, what's going on
It's
there?
a bit weird. I guess it's like humans are accustomed to what we know. So maybe there's like thousands of years of sausage evolution.
Well, I kind of get the sausage thing.
DNA.
Sausages are like, it's very convenient to have a sausage in a roll or on a sandwich, you know? So I kind of get that. I don't really get the
Bleeding.
plant-based looking like a piece of chicken or something. Like just... Anyway, did I interrupt your intro?
No, it's a perfect intro. So I'm sitting here with Matilda Brown and Scott Gooding from The Good farm, and it's sort of Christmas times out, and everyone's of course thinking about what to put on the Christmas table. I remember a few years ago watching this movie when I was living in Sweden called Cowspiracy.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, and it sort of shamed me into becoming a vegetarian and even vegan at the time. But I know you guys have a very different perspective on...
No, I was exactly the same. I watched that, and I watched probably 4 others in the same weekend and became vegan immediately. In fact, I was vegetarian before that. So I was vegetarian for maybe 5 years, vegan for probably about, 6 or 7, and then vegetarian, and then met Scott, who is a total meat eater. And then by that point, my body was sort of... my health had kind of gotten to the point where I really felt like I needed to start eating meat again. And during the time that I was vegetarian and vegan, I also had kind of an eating disorder that was slightly disguised by being a vegan as well. So there was like a lot going on with my eating during the years of my 20s. And
throw in overtraining.
Yeah, and it was just like my background will probably get to this at some point, but is acting and the film industry. So I grew up sort of, feeling like I needed to conform to some sort of, look or body size or that sort of thing. So, but then I did watch those documentaries and they were very convincing, and I absolutely did not want to contribute to a system of farming that hurt animals. And primarily for that reason, like I didn't really understand about the impacts of farming on the land at that point. It was definitely more an ethical, reason for animals, kind of why I became a vegan. And then... and then now we have a meat company. So
was this a way for you guys to reconcile? Because you're business partners, but also life partners, right? So you meet an omnivore and someone that, I just dug out of my own, kitchen, here that, the keto diet, for example, which I love. I was sharing with Scott that while I love eating, meat that's been harvested and treated beautifully and humanely through its lifetime, grass-fed, etc. Is high on my agenda. My wife loves pasta and carbs, and she's like, we can't just do this meat and salad thing. I know keto is more than that, but also the other one, of course, is the sustainable diet as well by Scott. So we've got vegan meeting, sort of omnivore, but probably low carb, maybe. How does that go when you start dating?
Well, so as I said, I'd sort of. This is quite a big conversation. I'm going to try and be concise, but I started sort of dieting from a very young age, and so by the time I met Scott, and I really knew nothing about nutrition, so I was kind of like taking stabs in the dark. Like should I try that? I'll try that diet. Like I was just a typical kind of, a teen that sort of put on weight in my teen years and then struggled with that, and then should have tried like every kind of diet to sort of work out how to lose weight. But by the time, and then got into my 20s and started counting calories and running every day and, eating lettuce. And got, basically, sort of not anorexic, but was quite thin and malnourished, I would say. But my hormones had gotten sort of, I think, just all over the place. So sort of by the time Scott came along, I still knew nothing about nutrition. It was just a whole lot of stuff I'd read, and my mind was sort of quite muddled. And then he came along, and being someone who is all about health and, his life is nutrition and knows a lot about it, and knew that I was a vegetarian, he sort of inquired in a very kind way, because he's not someone who would ever be like, you shouldn't be vegetarian. But he was more kind of, why don't you eat meat? And I sort of talked about it being from I didn't want to contribute to a system of farming that hurt animals. And then he was, sort of always about food sovereignty and always knew butchers that knew where their meat had come from, or that sort of he could trust. And he introduced me to that sort of meat. And, I mean, pretty quickly, like, he made slow-cooked lamb that was sort of cooking over 8 hours and smells wafting through the house. And it was like my first, my breaking my vegetarianism. When he took the lid off, I was like, just couldn't wait to eat it. And that was kind of it. Like, when I ate that lamb, it was like my body was just thanking me. And it was like my bones needed WD-40. Like, I just got to the point where my brain felt like it wasn't working properly anymore. Like, I wasn't eating all the good fats. And I didn't really look back. And that really changed the way that I ate. Like, Scott's knowledge around food, and thank God, because, I mean, eating vegetarian and vegan food is boring. You really get bored of it. I was really bored of the way that I was just not enjoying food anymore.
So, and in a sense, sort of personally unsustainable, potentially. I mean, I'm sure Novak Djokovic might say otherwise, right? But, so from a sustainability perspective, just on a personal level, maybe unsustainable from what you're telling me.
I think, totally. I think it was unsustainable. I think my body got to the point where it was crying out for something else.
So it's not necessarily the case that all vegans are bad humans, but there is a sense that, cows and sheep and lamb and, that consuming and having to harvest animals that have been, farting or, eating bad things, or that we have to grow produce for that also release carbon emissions, it leads to the agricultural system or ecosystem being one of the main contributors to carbon emissions in the world. So there's another little shame fact that 22% of the world's global carbon emissions come from agriculture, and of course the fingers get pointed at animals and as a result anyone who eats meat. What are your thoughts on this, and is there a counterfactual to all of this?
Yeah, I think it's a very to understand a lot of this takes a degree of sophistication. Like, there's many layers to it, but the problem with culture today that you're sitting one or the other opposing camp, and there's a lot of grey, right? There's a lot of stratifications to all this discussion. One might be that, yes, animals grazing on land requires land. That's a given, right? But a lot of that land is untenable for crops, right? We've got a farm up north, 5 hours north, and a lot of that paddock space devoted to our cattle is cragged, and there's depressions, and there's wooded areas, there's creeks running through it. So it's untenable to grow crops. So that's one consideration. So that's part of this greyness, right? The other is, and you alluded to it, is that a shit ton of crops are grown to feed cattle. So I don't know the stats, but it's pretty staggering. The global food production, corn, maize, rye, that then eventually goes into the feedlots to fast forward their growing, to get them to maturation in terms of ideal weight, and then they go to slaughter. Like, that's
in the factory farming system.
That's a system
the feedlots.
Yeah.
That whole system is fairly upside down, right? And you can pull that apart because there's this consumer expectation as to how much marbling our beef should have, how much fat coverage our beef should have, the size of our steaks, the colour of our steaks. So that all is, that's somewhat our fault, that there's this a criteria, if you like, a benchmark that our food needs to look and feel and taste like it does. And so to achieve that, it's kind of the chicken and the egg, but to achieve that, we've created this highly commoditized, highly industrialized version of cattle farming, which means that a good proportion of cattle will be finished in feedlots. And to accelerate their growth, they're given a high grain diet, a complex of maize and rye and corn and soy and all this other stuff that, you know, has fattens us up as well, but that's another conversation. But it does a very efficient, economical job, and that's to fatten up the cow. So in that context, yes, the vegan side of the fence has an argument, right? But we're not perpetuating that system. We're actually sort of, yes, we're dealing with cattle and we're dealing with animals, but if it was to be a spectrum in terms of animal welfare and an animal living its best life, we're on the other side of that picture. So, you know, our animals are finished on grass. So maybe people don't know, but it's a worthwhile exercise in explaining this, that all animals, so I'm talking about cows here, because cows get a bit of a raw deal in this global debate, right? They get a few fingers pointed at them. So all cows start their life on grass, but historically about 40% in Australia, and it's creeping now up to about 50%, will finish in feedlots. And how long they spend in feedlots is dependent upon a bunch of factors, but it could be as short as 2 weeks, but as long as 12 weeks and maybe more.
And they see massive weight gain, and
obviously
the farmers want to get the most yield out of
that's when it becomes a really highly commoditized system. So their weight is monitored possibly daily to get that outcome that we all expect. So when we reach for a sirloin in Woolies or Coles or wherever, it looks the way that we expect it to look. So going back to that spectrum, we're on the other side of that spectrum in terms of animal welfare and the animal living its best life. So it's finished on grass, which means if you manage that in a particular way, it can actually be very beneficial for the climate solution. You know, it could arguably be the greatest asset that we all have as a global society to remedy the shit fight that we've found ourselves in. So if you manage that cattle in the right way, it's pooing and weeing and munching on the grass and keeping all that grass in a vegetative state, and then it's shitting and it's pissing and it's moving on. So then, you know, all the microbes and the soil health is always improved in that situation. But it does come down to, again, I think you said it, Anders, it's not the cow, it's the how. And in this situation, it's how can we use the cow almost as the tool to help us on a global scale.
And I think the thing that's important to also say there is that when soil is healthy, it sequesters carbon. You store carbon in soil. So the healthier the soil, you know, the more the better functioning the carbon cycle. And that methane that the cows are farting out is part of that carbon cycle. I just wanted to add in that in case people didn't know about the...
Because, as a futurist, I'm always, you know, keen to find out, you know, the latest and greatest in, you know, carbon sequestration technologies, and you look at what the big miners like BHP and Santos and Rio, etc., are doing, and, you know, it's you know, they're talking about, you know, yes, you know, there might be a coal-fired power plant over here, but, you know, next to it, you know, we're going to take all of that carbon out of the atmosphere and we're going to store it under the soil through all these amazing carbon sequestration technologies. And then I'm like, we've got trees and we've got soil that do similar stuff. And I'm fascinated in some of those cycles that seemingly we've forgotten about, but then, I mean, there's obviously people like you at the Good Farm and regenerative farmers and the regenerative farming movements that are now saying that, no, the cow and how we do agriculture is one of the keys to actually unlocking some solutions.
Yeah, I mean, so when you're looking at soil health and vegetation, so, you know, a leaf will take carbon, sunlight, water. It needs those ingredients to eventually store carbon. It donates some of the carbon to soil, and then that's feeding microbe diversity, and that's what we want. And if you leave that soil untouched, it'll lock that carbon in the soil for an indefinite amount of time. So what I'm about to say now is going back to that grey area, and now we can't be too close-minded when we sit in one camp or the other. So when we're talking about crops, so forget about animals for a second, the same, you can subscribe to a plant-only diet, but you can still contribute to the climate crisis. Or you can subscribe to a plant-only diet and you can be a benefit. So it's how that land is managed, right? So if you've grown huge paddocks, as far as I can see, of corn, that in of itself creates problems. So you're going to have to combat the pests that are attracted to that one species. One species doesn't occupy huge paddocks in nature. That doesn't
happen.
Doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So then we've got pesticides and probably herbicides and potentially fertilizer if you're not managing that land in the right way, i.e. growing multiple species and rotating. And then it comes to harvesting, you're going to dig up that. You're going to plough up that land. You're going to have machinery that goes into the land and turns it over, which is essential for getting the plant out of the ground and harvesting. Great, that serves one purpose, but in the process of doing that, you're unlocking all that carbon.
So tilling is the new devil.
Tilling is the new devil. Yeah.
And Till and I talk about this.
Not me, Till.
No pun intended here. Sorry.
Yeah, we've been texting. Yeah. We talk about this a lot, and I think it's really important. Like, again, it's about a sophisticated understanding of these large concepts. I think we're very quick to jump into a camp. So it's actually not about the animal or the plant, right? It's actually about how that animal or plant or anything in between is grown and managed and is raised. And so you can contribute to the global crisis in a positive or a negative way by subscribing to whatever persuasion is yours based on how that plant has been managed or how that...
But I guess then from sort of a vegetarian or vegan perspective, if all you eat is, I mean, this sounds super reductionist, but if you all you eat is polenta and lettuce, but it's grown in a way that's very monoculture and right. It's factory farming and all the rest, you're actually, and probably there's maybe some snakes and some birds and some rodents living in those fields that are damaged, and you're also doing it with tilling technologies. You're potentially doing massive carbon damage.
I think that's the risk that I mean, it's sort of the problem with like social media these days, or anything that where anywhere you get your information at a really base level. So I think there's a lot of people who go vegan because they don't want to be contributing to the climate problems that we have. But they don't do any more research into that. So it's like, okay, for me, you go, okay, great. Well, that's go vegan then. But what are you replacing your meat with? Like, what are you eating? Much more bread, wheat, grains, rice, legumes. How is that all being farmed? Are you getting it all from the organic farmers market? Do you know your farmer? Are they using sprays? How are they tending to their land? There's I mean, and then you kind of go like, you can't live your life making sure that you can't live life. Some people probably do, but it's hard to tick all those boxes. Yeah. It's really hard to want to do the right thing, and our food system is not set up for doing the right thing. It's really hard to know where your food comes from. So it's really hard to actually be, kind of contributing positively to the environmental movement by food choices. if you are just simply going, that's what I'm gonna do now, but I'm not gonna educate myself in any other ways.
But it's actually not made easy for us.
It's not.
Because as Till's saying, like, it's not clear to me or many of us where any of our food comes from. I feel like we're at this tipping point of that being more a thing, particularly, and meat sort of leading the charge with that. But it's less obvious where our corn has come from, or our legumes, or, you know, fill in the blank. So we're sort of almost going back in time, right? We're going, you know, the buzzwords are regen, sustainable, organic, local. All those things have been talked about for, you know, several years. So we're going back. So we're leapfrogging back in time over the industrialised food system, back to when everything was probably organic. Well, it would have been pre the industrial farming revolution. Everything was local. There would have been a higher degree of sustainable farming, you know, rotation, crop coverage, less monoculture, all that stuff. So it's like we're going, you know, we're having a retro sort of revolution in terms of agriculture. And so all these touch points that now we're seeking out, it needs to be diverse across all food groups. So we know where our salmon's coming from, we know where our pork chops are coming from, we know where our legumes are coming from. And at that point, people can make really informed, conscious choices. Okay, do I want to shop here, eat that thing that potentially causes more climate and environmental and ecological harm, or do I want to eat this thing over here that can contribute to the solution? And so, you know, I really want to hammer that point home, that it's nothing to do with plants versus animals. It's actually the farming methodology and principles and guidelines.
But it's very hard to really know where your food comes from. I mean, one of the reasons we started the Good Farm Shop was because I wanted to know that I wanted to be eating regeneratively farmed meat. If I was going to be, like, to give you some context, as I said, I wasn't eating meat. I didn't go vegan for climate reasons. I went vegan for animal reasons. But I hadn't started hearing about regenerative farming until my mum started regenerating our farm. We've had our farm for 40 years, since before I was born. It's always been farmed conventionally, so sprayed. You know, cattle stay in one big paddock. They eat all the grass down. Meanwhile, sprays over here, fertilisers to grow that grass. Then those cows move over to that grass, eat that grass. Meanwhile, the other paddocks get crops down, sprayed with fertilisers to grow that, and the land becomes addicted to the fertiliser. The soil can't grow crops on its own, and that's sort of like a conventional way of farming.
Sounds like a kind of self-reinforcing negative cycle that then
it's an addiction.
Yeah.
You can see the paddocks that are grown this way. They're lush green. You know, regen farms are tufty and kind of messy looking, scruffy, and they've got, like, you know, there's trees poking up in them. The conventionally farmed paddocks are the ones that everyone goes, oh, look how beautiful that is. You know, it's you know, a beautiful paddock of you know, not many trees, beautiful green grass from the urea that's put on it. And then if you see a lake nearby or a water nearby, you'll see some really, like, dirty kind of red sort of stuff on the surface, and that's the urea running down that's getting into the system, the water systems. That's how you can kind of spot it. But what I was saying was my mum had started to talk about regenerating the farm. So I was hearing this word regenerative farming for a while, and I was sort of like, la, 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 like I wasn't paying any attention to it, because mum's been going on about the environment for a long time. She's
quite the activist.
Yeah, she is. And, you know, when you're young, you sort of kind of like, I don't know, I wasn't gung-ho about it. And it really wasn't until I think we went up to the farm a couple of Christmases ago, and her and Mick, the farmer, were sort of wandering around talking about the farm and what they'd been doing differently. And I think it was like we'd heard it enough times. I'd heard it enough times. I'd heard small things enough that I started to take notice of it, and then started to do our own research on it, and then basically came back to Sydney and was like, I want to be eating the beef from the farm. I want to be eating meat that's contributing positively to the environment. How do we get it? So then we went to the butcher shop, and said, do you guys, have any regeneratively farmed meat? He looked at me like I was in, like, shut up, lady, just get your meat.
Yeah.
It was COVID. There were lines outside the door. There wasn't time for chit-chat.
Yeah.
I wanted to know if he knew the farms that his beef came from. Couldn't give me an answer about
Too
that.
many questions, Till.
Yeah, too many questions. Like, you're not supposed to ask
in, one
questions. And then I went to the supermarket. I was like, oh, sorry, do you guys have any regeneratively farmed meat? She was like, what? Anyway, so basically kind of became quite apparent that you can't get regeneratively farmed produce locally or in very many places. It's a really new term to people. I didn't even know that most butcher shops don't know where their meat comes from. They just get it crates in. They don't actually butcher. It's like butchering is a dying art. Most butcher shops get crates of cuts in from a wholesaler or an abattoir. So we basically were like, we've got to get the meat from the farm, and that's how the Good Farm Shop started. We just wanted to know we were eating regeneratively farmed meat, and we knew that our farm was being farmed regeneratively. It's now certified land to market, which is the sort of stamp of approval for farms that are doing right by the land, and they get their soil tested and all that stuff. And so it started as a simple cow share to like a group of friends who we thought might be interested in eating this type of food. But yeah, it's my point is it's really hard to know where your food is coming from. We've come up, we make ready meals from our produce, and even just...
I have tried them. They're fantastic.
And you're still standing?
Well, I'm still standing, yeah. Well, I think, I'm trying to think of, I met Scott at Warriewood Markets, I think it's probably 3 weeks ago or so. I think I picked up there was a chicken curry, that was...
Stroganoff, maybe?
And the beef stroganoff, yeah, you remember well. Both beautiful meals, so, yeah.
Yeah, well, Scott
we're learning that, going back to how hard it is for the consumer. It was hard for us, and then that was the spark and the genesis for the Good Farm. It started off a cow share scheme. But we're getting towards 18 months into the business, and we're learning that, hey, some of this terminology is too avant-garde, it's too new, it's too... So we're having to, like, meet the market, right? So we've got on our labels, on our ready meals, it's like, and our website, it's like regen this, regen that, it's regen chicken curry. And people, 80% of people go, what's Regan chicken curry?
Yeah,
like
you used to be vegan, now you're vegan. Yeah.
Some sort of cuisine or something. Is that Asian? So we're learning that, okay, well, let's meet the market. What's the market accustomed to right now? It's not to say that people won't understand and recognise regen in the future, but now it's maybe organic's a better word, or sustainable, or environmentally conscious, or whatever it is. So we're learning as well, like all the time.
Yeah. And then you also learn, like, most people don't care.
Shit.
Yeah, wow.
Actually,
you really have to go.
There's a lot of people that do, particularly around here, and that's probably the socioeconomic stratification, status of people around here. So typically the higher you are in that stratification, the more bandwidth you have to care, right? When life is a struggle and you're fighting for survival, you don't give a shit about.
Well, you care. Your priorities are elsewhere. You're trying to survive, so you just want to feed your family.
Those on the front line in Ukraine aren't worrying about the CO2 emissions of.
Yeah.
I forget where I was going with that.
Yeah, but it's a good point. I think because regenerative farming or organic or biodynamic, I mean, it can conjure up images of luxury and all sorts of privilege, etc. And then, but it's interesting. And I meet that sort of resistance when I'm out working with clients to kind of say, oh, well, that's a nice, first world problem and all these kind of things, right? But a lot of the research that's coming out now as well is that even, in Australia, 66%, according to one piece of research, of consumers in Australia now would favour sustainable food, for example, and 9 out of 10, at least in research, say that they would be happy to pay a premium for sustainably grown foods.
It's actually, yeah.
And then there is now a rise of what's known as the conscious consumer. And again, Raconteur's global research out of the UK shows that 55% of global consumers at least aspire to wanting to know where their food and their produce and their products come from, sort of from farm to table or producer to consumer. So there seems to be a shift, and even in the pandemic, when people are doing it tough in the UK, organic sales went through the roof. I think it was like at least a 10% increase in the first pandemic year, and it kept going that way.
Okay. Yeah.
We'll put that in the show notes. But seems to be a groundswell, and I think even in Walmart, this is about 15 years ago, Walmart in the United States and its fresh produce section already back, I think, in 2006 or 7. Again, we'll need to do a little fact check on that. 10% of its fresh produce was grown locally. Now, there's different definitions about what is local and all the rest. So, yes, I think there is still this sort of moniker that maybe it's privilege and it's luxury and all the rest. But I think people across the world, care about where their food comes from and whether what they're about to feed their children is something that's going to be healthy. And
yeah, I guess maybe I was too brash with that statement that the lower you are in the socioeconomic, life's a struggle, you don't care. That your mind's elsewhere is probably a better way to frame it. Not that you don't care. I mean,
but I can relate to it because I remember dating many moons ago a French vegetarian, and I remember that exact comment because it came from my parents in Sweden, and whenever we sat down for a meal, and they try to cater, the best they could, but like for them not eating meat, that for them is like, that's a slap in the face, and that to them seemed super entitled, and that like she didn't appreciate the food they put on the table, and so they didn't gel particularly well. But for them, it was like, you eat what you're served, and so and for them and their parents who've grown up into the Depression, like you ate every bit of the animal from nose to tail, but the idea of vegetarianism seemed to them to be very sort of entitled. So it's interesting.
I think just on the point of people caring, I think people do care, but I think to an extent, and this is just a story from another shop. I'm not going to say who it is because I don't have the permission to tell this story, but I like the story because it's a good representation of, like, we do markets and we do them with a few other butcher shops, and I was talking with him recently about this sort of thing. Do people care or do they not care, and how much do they care and how much do they want to spend? And he says he gets in two types of chicken. One chicken is the free range chicken, the proper free range chicken that's pecking around, and the other one is legally free range, which is not free range, not what you would think free range is. And so the consumer comes along and says, I'd like the free range chicken, and he goes, great, it's just here, and he goes, it's $32. And, I don't want to pay $32. Well, but what's this chicken over here? That's $22. Yeah, well, that's the legally free-range chicken, but the only grass that one sees is on the way to the processing place. Good, I'll take that one. It's like, what's your idea of what's the consumer's idea of free range? Oh, it's pecking around, it's eating the worms, it's that proper free range. But when it comes to paying $32 for it, they just don't want to. And that's what it costs. That is what it costs. I mean,
it's a true
that is
cost that people have forgotten about.
Yeah.
From a sustainability perspective, if someone buys a T-shirt for $10, there's probably some illegalities somewhere in the supply chain, whether it's in Bangladesh where people are not getting paid properly. Like to think that something a T-shirt can cost $10 to produce, when it lands in whatever part of the world you live in is kind of crazy because people aren't paying the hashtag true cost of
when you
food
can get a $10 chicken at a supermarket, a $42 chicken seems ludicrous. And that's what the chickens are that we sell. We make $3 on a chicken, but we get them from a small family-owned regenerative farm.
I mean, they're golden chickens.
But I mean, people love them. They do taste better. They 100%. I mean, I won't eat. I'm a total meat regenerative snob now, obviously, and I really feel like you can taste the difference.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when you have watched those vegan documentaries and you see how animals can be treated, I feel like I can taste that in a chicken. I feel like I'm like, I don't like that tastes disgusting to me. So knowing, I don't know whether it's like unconscious bias or whether it really does taste that much better. But I just think it's chalk and cheese, the factory farmed animals to the animals that have had a full life on grass.
I mean, sort of going back to an old point I made earlier, like there's two parts to our education. There's the part about the agriculture, and it's the how. It's not the cow, it's the how. So that's one part, and what is regen. The other is remodeling what we expect our beef to taste like, feel like, look like. So if you have a rump steak that's being finished in a feedlot versus they will look different. Gram for gram, one will have more fat coverage and marbling than the other, and they'll taste different. So the grass finished version will taste meatier, it will taste gamier, and there'll be difference in coloration and all that. So it's that in of itself. Like I expected, I was talking to our farmer when we first started this, and he was like, you need to tell people that there'll be a difference in mouthfeel and flavour and texture. And I expected more pushback than we've had. But I think people who come to us and buy our produce, I mean, we only have, I'm not just saying this because we're live here, but we have great feedback on all aspects of our produce. Oh,
there could very well be people who have it and then don't order again, of course,
who don't thought about that.
I doubt they're going to tell us that they don't like it.
Very true.
I keep eyeing that little beautiful green soup that you guys do.
Oh, yeah, the green soup.
It seems to have been so popular that I keep missing out.
I know, so, it does go
Maybe Santa Claus will bring me some.
That's actually it's very good for you, that soup, because it's basically bone broth.
Yeah.
With some, kale and spinach in it.
Yeah.
And some butter.
Amazing.
We do have really good, I mean, people do love, I think people sometimes try it because they're like, what is regenerative meat? Is it going to taste different? Yeah, they're curious. I think they like the idea, obviously, of being able to eat meat and feel good about it. That's certainly my feeling when I eat it. Like, I'm happy to be eating that meat knowing that it's helping, not, doing the opposite. But then I think it's tasty.
I agree, and I think, and I picked this point up in one of your books, that it's like a little bit like going back and eating your grandmother's cooking. Certainly, sort of the keto approach. Like, I was blessed with a grandmother, Ingrid, in Sweden, who grew up on a farm, and like her cooking was really hearty. And I mean, even when I share the stories with Nicole of, her scraping, all the oil out of the, out of the pan onto the food. Like, some people will be like, oh my God, that sounds crazy. But I'm like, there was so much flavor. And so, the whole regenerative movement, biodynamic, the keto approach, the good fats. I mean, it's inspired me to get more active in the kitchen, which my wife Nicole loves when I actually cook. And so when I buy steaks, yes, they tend to be at least grass fed. Sometimes biodynamic, sometimes now obviously it's going to be regen as well. But like I look after every part of that meat. So. I am the one, even when we go out to a restaurant, it's like, oh, that T-bone, that's like, I'll be the one gnawing on that in the restaurant. Everyone's like, what are you doing, mate? I'm like, no, probably got like fat on the sides of the face and, little bits of meat stuck in my teeth. And then it's, after that, I'm like, can I keep the bone? And I will make my own broth. The chickens that we eat, for example, that like the bones all go into a pot, and so I make my own bone broth. So watch out, there might be some competition at the markets. But like, and then when we use that broth, to go into spaghetti bolognese or or into a soup or whatever it happens to be, I feel like you can taste the goodness in it. So I agree with your point that it tastes better.
Yeah.
I talk about being the custodian of your own health, right? So taking ownership, not outsourcing, and this might take years to accomplish, and we might not always be 100% in control of that, but the most fast-tracked way to be the custodian of your own health is to cook as much food that you ingest in your own kitchen. When we're outsourcing through restaurants and cafes and fast food outlets, you're also outsourcing your own health, because they invariably, and there's a few brands that don't fit into this mold, but they invariably want to make money that your health isn't at the core of their business. So what you're saying is you're cooking from scratch, right? You're getting bones, like the part of the animal that's sort of underutilized and often thrown away. You're collecting bones, and then you're building a broth, and then the broth goes into the soup or the casserole or whatever. And so there's multiple layers to that. And then what you're doing is you're creating an environment that your family can enjoy. You're sitting down, you're enjoying that, you're nourishing yourself and your family. Like, that to me is like the greatest gift anyone can give themselves and their family, the ability to cook. And you don't have to be Jamie Oliver. It's not about being an expert. It's actually being brave enough to experiment. And your grandma would have been typical of everyone in her generation, I would have thought, cooking from scratch in a kitchen. My grandma and luckily my parents echoed that. But we've lost that connection. We've lost connection with cooking, and we've lost connection with food. So going back, we need to attach to the stories of our grandparents and the love and appreciation of ingredients and getting back into the kitchen, because everything's like ultra convenient now. Like we can bloody order food and it comes in 15 minutes. Like, that's mental. Like Milk Run and
I think it's less than that. I think it's like 10 minutes.
Like, it's amazing. Like, I'm not anti-progress. Like, that is phenomenal that something can be delivered on your doorstep within, like, whatever it is, 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's in a drone or a robot.
Yeah, it's mental. Like, it's pretty exciting. But that further contributes to us really disconnecting from real food and cooking, because cooking is more than, I know I'm rambling now, but cooking is more than just putting a few ingredients together. It's the act of serving you and your family and bringing you all together. Like, you don't get that when you're ripping something off ripping the lid off something and eating it straight out the container. Like, we need to be more conscious about all aspects of food, not just where it comes from, but how we treat it and how we consume it. Yeah, I think that's and only then, right? So only then, when most of the food that you're consuming is made in your own kitchen, can you truly start to become the custodian of your own health. And if someone is listening to this and they go, oh shit, I don't cook anything, because there will be people that don't cook anything, right? They get a smoothie from the cafe on the way to work, they get some sushi lunchtime at work, and then they get whatever for dinner. Like, they will exist, and that's because of the culture and the society that we're in. So
but what was your message to them?
Well, a move in the right direction might be, okay, well, over the next 12 months, I'm going to pledge to myself and my family that 10% of the food consumed over my week I make. So that might mean that you make the smoothie on your way out the door. Might be that simple.
Or that you cook with your kids when you make it turn into a fun...
Yeah.
And so there's no rush for this stuff. Like, it could be that 10% becomes 20% over the following. So in 2 years, you've gone from nothing and outsourcing your food and outsourcing your health to now a quarter almost of the food that I consume I make, and I know exactly what's in it, to the herb, to the oil, to the spice, to the fats, to the, I know explicitly what's in that dish. And I've brought all my members of my family together, even if it's like once or twice a week. And then there's conversations, there's check-ins, and so it has this like potency and power to unite people to connect. We're in an unconnected world right now, despite all the connections that we have digitally. So it's potent, powerful stuff, and not to be understated.
Well, I mean, there's so much symbolism to food too, right? Whether it's breaking bread, I know that's high in carbs, but or the Last Supper, and lots of religions talk about have the symbolism around blood and wine, or whatever it happens to be, or if you're an atheist or you're spiritual in any other way, just the coming together and spending quality time. It's often around a meal, and it is a wonderful way of slowing down. I think also it kind of forces you to slow down. So yes, it's possible to buy the ribeye and do a reverse sear for an hour or something, and it doesn't take up too much of your time. But like some of the less expensive cuts, if you actually just invest the time and do a slow cook, they can be the most beautiful meals you'll ever have. So
and easier. You can't stuff it up really. You can kind of set and forget.
Yeah.
Whereas you can stuff up a steak, right? The margin for error is bigger than a slow cook, and the slow cook's cheaper. You can put it on before work, get home, the whole apartment smells delicious, and it's probably you could
turn vegan to meat eater. That's what he did with the slow cooked lamb. But we're lucky in our family because Scott cooks all the time. I thought I was a cook, and then I met Scott and realised I wasn't.
Good cook.
Yeah, I'm not. You've got a real knack for flavour though. You really do. Like everyone who eats Scott's food, like just goes, how do you make it so tasty? I've done this exact same thing. I've followed a recipe, but there's something about the way that you cook that and he says it all the time. He says it's fat. It's butter, it's salt.
All those things we have shamed.
Yeah, all the things that we have shamed, stay away from. Fat's a fat. Like, fat will make you fat. Not true. But it is those slow cooks, like the ribs. They're so underestimated. They're always the last ones to go, but they're the ones that are full of flavour. They're the cheapest. They're the best for you because they're full of that good fat.
Yeah, and all the connective tissue and,
And then if you participate in this food system, I mean, this is from a sustainability perspective. You can do it in a guilt-free fashion.
Yeah.
And you might actually be doing the environment a service. I'm casting my mind and refreshing my mind now. Is it Alan Savory, who's is he Zimbabwean farmer who sort of started
He's Australian.
this
Isn't he Australian? He's Australian, but I think he went to Africa.
Yeah.
I think it was, and kind of pioneered regenerative farming.
Okay. So just talk us through about sort of like on a meta level. So, I mean, Scott, you kind of talked about, how to manage the farm in a certain way, but talk us through, but like on a global level, like the regenerative farming movement and movies like, is it Kissing the Soil or Kiss the Soil? Kiss the Ground.
Or Biggest Little Farm, that's another really good one.
Yeah.
That was actually one of the ones that got me listening.
Okay.
Mum said, watch Biggest Little Farm. And it was like, it's a beautiful film.
It's another great recommendation. I'll take that on board, and then
you'll want to buy a farm.
Yeah.
It's just dirt.
Yeah.
And you'll want to regenerate it. It takes like 7 years, but it's.
I reckon the best place, if someone sort of wants to, if this conversation is intrigued or, grown someone's curiosity, Alan Savory's TED Talk, right? So it's the TED Talk, whatever that is, 14 minutes or something along those lines. And he outlines his methodology of farming, and he provides evidence of how he's implicated this methodology and the results that have followed. So he proposes that if we manage livestock in a particular way, something that I've touched on today, there's an ability to turn a lot of these desertified regions through that equatorial belt into more green regions. So if there's more greenery, then obviously there's more carbon sequestration and healthier soil, and we start to sort of drag and pull carbon out of the atmosphere. I mean, it's worth noting that Till and I have been talking about this of late, how the world is greener now than it was, in recent times, and that's because there's more carbon. So carbon is the plant's currency. That's its fuel. It needs carbon. That's an essential. So if there's more carbon, it's easier for the plant to absorb that and convert that into sugar and to store that into the ground. That's obviously feeding microbes and feeding soil biodiversity. But also there's been a concerted effort by the Indians and the Chinese to plant trees, and their population, as we know, is immense, right? So if they all apply themselves, or if some people apply themselves and they dedicate to planting trees, pretty much overnight we've got billions more trees. And so there's been two factors at play. There's been the increase in CO2 in our atmosphere, that is the plant's fuel. So the amount of foliage, the square foot of foliage has increased. So even though there's deforestation in regions of the world, we're actually greener than we were decades ago. And it's the carbon and it's the concerted effort by certain countries of this world.
So even if we stopped all global emissions right now, what I've seen on your website and in some of your videos is that there's a lot of legacy carbon out there as well doing damage, and that soil and the way we farm might actually be a massive solution to that. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, so there'll be if we all started walking to work and there was no cruise liners and there's no massive primary industry gurgling out CO2. So if things ground to a halt tomorrow, there'd be this legacy of the CO2. So it's not like the problem necessarily goes away, even if and that's not going to happen, right? It might take us 100 years, 150 years to transition to renewables. It might take longer. So if that's the case, we need to find ways to sequester that carbon. So we need to create a deficit, right? So it's all there. We need to pull it into the ground, and farming is one way, seaweed is another, and there's probably many that I'm not aware of.
So check out Paul Hawken,
right?
Drawdown Project. Is that
the seaweed stuff?
Paul Hawken in his book.
I've got that book, Regeneration. It's good.
And Project Drawdown, I think, talks a lot about the power of soil to sequester.
Yeah.
Trees as one of the best technologies to actually sequester.
Rewilding.
Yeah.
And rewilding, regen.
Yeah.
There's also, I was on the panel, I was on a judging panel recently for, it was Polestar, which is an electric car, and
from Sweden, I should add.
right, there you go. And they're coming here, or they've just been released here. And New York Times Australia Style magazine joined together to do their first sort of sustainability awards. And I was on one of the judges on it, and one of the companies that came up was turning carbon into building blocks.
Yep.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Just like you can build a house out of the building blocks that have taken the carbon out of the atmosphere and turned it into...
That's
I mean, incredible what people are coming up with.
Yeah. And of course, this goes back to the point that carbon's not necessarily bad because it is the building block of all life.
Of all life, yeah.
Yet, at the
we,
same
we-
time.
we were lucky enough, and can I drop names?
Yeah.
No,
Sure.
Again, if anyone's curious about this space, I really
Yeah.
suggest looking at a guy called Dr. Zach Bush. He was on tour here recently, and we were lucky enough to have him over for lunch. And he is fairly unique in the sense that he combines a high intellectual power. So he's a smart cookie, but wrapped up in compassion and love, and so he's quite unique in that regard. But he talks about this as an opportunity. So rather than condemning the world, and there's this sense of this impending doom, like we've got 12 more years and mass extinction, blah blah blah. He's like, no, this is an opportunity. CO2 in the atmosphere is a fuel that vegetation needs. Like, let's harvest that.
We had a bunch of people around for lunch, not just him, but it was Farmer's Footprint, which is a great, if anyone, there's another really good sort of educational tool around this is Farmer's Footprint. And he's the founder of that in the States, and they've started one in Australia. They brought him out and he did a couple of tours. So we put on a lunch for them and Zach. And he was just, his whole thing it's all about how we tell this story. He doesn't even say, let's not do that. He just says, there's a great opportunity. Plants need carbon. We've got lots in our atmosphere. How can we use it? I mean, I'm not even going to try and say what he said because it is just going to dumb it down so much. But I just love that, we are there's so much talk about how scary it is and how we have to act now. And it's overwhelming for people. Like, no wonder people just put their head in the sand and don't do anything. I recommend, listening to Zach talk about it because it's empowering and it's really inspiring and it actually motivates you. I know I went on a trip to Heron Island. Do you know Heron Island? It's a research centre off the coast of North Queensland, and it's a research centre, and they do a lot of research about the coral bleaching and the effect that the climate's had on the ocean. And there's a 3-day kind of talk, and you're listening to Tim Flannery and some other very smart scientists talking about the problems that we're having and how fucked we are. And I went away from that. I had just fell pregnant with my first child, and I think I felt really sad about and overwhelmed, and I wanted to act, but I had no idea what or how to, and so instead I did nothing. And I got morning sickness, so I couldn't really do much anyway. I was pretty much,
laid up.
Yeah, and I had 9, but I sort of it was the beginning of wanting to do something.
Yeah.
And it took a good 2.5 years for me to I was kind of going how can, because I'm an actor, writer and director, and I guess I felt like I wanted to do more and it just took time to do that. And I guess the great thing about regenerative farming or eating regeneratively, whether you're a vegetarian or a vegan or meat eater, is that you are actually participating in the climate, I don't want to use the word crisis, but in, doing something positive for the environment. You can actively make a choice with your dollars around your food choices. So I think that's, if there's anyone out there going like, oh, I am overwhelmed, I don't know what to do, or, start looking up regenerative foods, start going to the farmer's market and talking to the store holder, and if they are the farmer, ask them about their farm, be interested, be curious, go to your butcher and ask them if they can source some regenerative meat. It's not easy and they probably are not going to do it. But if you ask, and the more people who do, the more they will be inclined to, because it's all about what the consumer wants. If the consumer starts asking, the shopkeepers and the supermarkets and the butchers will have to meet their demands. Or else just start your own good farm shop.
Yeah,
like we did.
Absolutely. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about favorite Christmas recipes here in a moment as well. But there seems to be some recipes for participating and actually making a difference. I mean, I'm hearing even just like sustainable comfort eating is actually part of the solution. I love the idea of comfort eating actually solving the climate crisis. So,
nice, like it. Yeah,
we had Sarah Wilson on this show a little while ago, and we talked to her about a new concept in the world of psychology, which is that many kids now have PTSD, but not the old PTSD. They have pre-traumatic stress disorder because they are reading the news about this looming climate crisis, and as a result, people now have pre-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety. Many women, particularly Gen Z and some Gen Y, are opting to remain childless because they don't want to bring a child into this world that sort of has all the loom and doom over it. Where and also then we hear about here's the carbon emissions you're responsible for if you put a child on this planet. There's so much sort of shame and anxiety about all of these. But the most fundamental sort of human need of actually sitting down and breaking bread or comfort eating might be one of the solutions. I think that's super genius.
Comfort eating, yeah.
So I'm curious, what's on the menu at Christmas in the Gooding and Brown family, and my final little hack I'm going to ask for as well is if there's a way to do really good glazing that doesn't involve too much sugar as well. So.
That's definitely one for Scott. But speaking of carbon emissions, we're going to the UK. No, we are going to the UK for Christmas with the family. Scott is from the UK and he hasn't been back in 12 years. So we're going to brave the, 24 hours of economy with the kids and go over for 3 weeks.
Have I not told you?
We've cracked these jokes between us before.
And
so I think, I don't know, what is on the, what will your mum cook or will you cook?
Yeah, it's been probably close to 25 years since I've probably had Christmas with my mum.
Oh, wow.
Oh, at least 17. She always used to do, because she ran pubs, so by the time, and so for the
and
whole
so did your
month,
dad.
Yeah. So all of December there was Christmas turkey on the menu. There's a sort of ode to Christmas. So by the time our Christmas dinner came and all the punters had left, she was like, I'm so over turkey. So she used to do duck. Fast forward 17 years, I don't know what we'll be having. I wouldn't mind duck. But I think her love of cooking has somewhat diminished because she did it for 40 years. So I dare say I'd love to do something with her in the kitchen. So I guess we'll get there, unpack, we'll have that discussion about what everyone wants to have, and then we'll see what eventuates.
Yeah.
And I'm not the man to ask about glazing unless it's double.
But tell you what my mum does really good, and it's not a glaze, but she does a chicken with grapes in it. So you put the chicken in or the turkey, you can do it with turkey, and you put grapes around. So you put it in for a bit, then you take it out, and about half an hour before it's ready, you put all the grapes around it, and then you put it back in, and the grapes like caramelize and kind of get soft, and then the juice mixes in. It's just really good.
Yeah. Genius.
It's really good. You'd never think it.
Yeah. But that's absolute genius. So gross. Glazing. We're having glazing conversations in our family at the moment.
Right.
So yeah. I wonder if there's any recipes we should try out in the from the sustainable diet, from the keto book, or anything else that you can recommend people to check out, or anything off your website.
Your ice cream's pretty good. Your healthy ice cream.
Yeah, there's a couple of ice creams. There's a blueberry and chocolate ice cream. That's always a winner. But there's a bunch of slow cooked dishes. You know, your cheeks and your lamb shoulders and your ribs and all that yumminess. And I think people who may be unfamiliar with cooking and unfamiliar with those cuts might be somewhat surprised or impressed. Like, you can really not bugger it up. As long as you've got, you know, a few herbs and you've seasoned it and there's a bit of liquid in there, whatever that is, whether that's, and play around with it. Like, it could be white wine, could be rosé, it could be red wine, it could be beer, it could be broth. Like, you won't bugger it up. It'll taste amazing.
But if they don't have the book,
bugger it up,
you can go to Scott's website. He has heaps of free recipes just on his site, which is scottgoodingproject.com. Is that right?
Yeah, there's loads on our website.
Oh, and there's heaps on our website as well.
Which is thegoodfarm.shop.
Correct.
Very
correct?
good.
Yeah.
Farm.shop. Yeah.
All right. So go and check that out. There's some beautiful stuff to buy. I'm sure people can transact with, you know, dollars and Bitcoin.
They can,
and
but if you're
whatever
bringing
else.
this out before Christmas, we literally do everything at our shop. I mean, it's just Scott and I. So there's no other people picking and packing while we're away. The shop is officially closed from like now.
Yeah, from that. We're getting on a plane.
until we get back on the 9th.
Well, you can still
of course,
order.
you can put orders in,
You just
but
won't get it.
yeah, it won't be fulfilled until we get back. So have a beautiful Christmas, everyone.
Yeah. And I think a beautiful time to sort of slow down. I mean, it's always a reminder to kind of start taking it slow. And the idea of slow cooking, I find, is actually, you know, very regenerative for the soul, as opposed to trying to do a Jamie Oliver 20-minute meal and rush it out and just like let something, you know, stew away or simmer away through the whole day. I think there's maybe something therapeutic in that. Yeah.
Firmly agree.
Yeah. Good. Thanks for coming on to the Second Renaissance. I wish you all the best for Christmas, and no doubt we'll bump into each other in the village, which is, of course, Avalon Village as well. Great to have you on the show and talk sustainability and sustainable comfort eating that's actually doing well and good for the planet.
Thanks,
Good on you,
Anders.
mate. Thanks for having us.
For more information about the Second Renaissance and our work on sustainable innovation, please visit my website, www.anderssulmanilson.com. We would appreciate if you can take a moment to share the podcast with a friend or a colleague and help build the movement. We hope that what we learned together on the Second Renaissance can help us all build a sustainable future for ourselves and our children. See you in the near future.